Hi, everybody. Meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to tonight's Joe Chaffee Weather Show right here on YouTube. It's the 5th of September. It's 7 o'clock Eastern Time. And, well, guess what? We still have Hurricane Dorian. I get to the point with these things after a while. I really wish they would just go away. So, this will be gone in another few days. We still have to get through the rest of tonight and tomorrow, then wait for what happens on Saturday when it approaches Nova Scotia and Newfoundland as a powerful post-tropical cyclone. And I think this is going to be quite the storm that moves out over the open waters and heads for the Canadian Maritime provinces. You can see Dorian on the satellite loop right there to the side, to the left of me. And the eye is still there, but when we see it on the radar, you're going to notice that there's a bit more of a kind of a slightly more ragged look to it. The eastern quadrant is not particularly active. The southeast quadrant is. The northeast and northern part of the storm are actually producing some fairly strong thunderstorms that are sweeping inland in North Carolina. And we've had, folks were asking last night about the tornado aspect of it, and I'm not really too well versed regarding that. It turns out the tornadoes, I don't know what the count is at the moment, but if you want to use tornado warnings as a count, I mean, I certainly have seen about 15 of them between last night and during the day today, and probably going to see a few more before this is all said and done. So we're going to go right to the surface map, and we're going to start there. Hang on one second while I set the window up, and we'll get this thing going. The coastlines today of South and North Carolina have gotten hit especially hard. Given the slow movement of this, you are seeing a prolonged area of a prolonged period of gales along the South Carolina and now the North Carolina coast, and the rain area has actually spread pretty far inland. I've been using I-95 has been a rather convenient reference point up until now because it seemed as if the back edge of the rain was following 95, and indeed, where 95 starts to veer inland, the back edge of the rain began to push pretty far inland and west of the coast. And here we have it on the observations. The radar is going to come and go, but one of the things that I want to watch closely are some of these observations that are taking place in North Carolina, because I think that's going to be very, very important. Watch this particular buoy here and watch these observations that are going on south of Wilmington, because I think this is really going to determine where the track of this thing is. By the way, I got myself a little pen extension on Google Chrome, and I'm using it here for the first time. So here's the center of Dorian. This is roughly about 30 or 40 miles from the coast, and it looks like it's going to try to move right in this direction, in between this buoy out to the east and these observing stations out right on the mainland, again, south of Wilmington, North Carolina, which is up just a little bit further to the north of here. So we'll come back to these a little later. If we start to see the buoy out to the east, if that wind goes more easterly or northeasterly, that's going to tell us that Dorian is veering off to the right. If we see these winds go northerly, you sort of expect that, or northwesterly, then at least it's an indication that Dorian is going to be heading right in along this spot. And the eye is actually still pretty wide here. That's about, I don't know, 20 or 30 miles or so. The strongest winds seem to be now moving more north west of the eye. There's a fairly solid band of thunderstorms in the northwestern part of the eye. But notice, and I have the radar echoes just keep coming and going, but you'll notice that a lot of what's on the east side is a little lacking. We don't have it as well defined as what we saw during last night and early this morning. So here's the visible satellite loop, and we've got Dorian doing its thing. Clearly, the motion now is northeast. The eye is well enough defined here on the satellite that you can actually see it's moving more 030 or 035. I'm not sure exactly what they're carrying, maybe even 040. So this looks to pretty much move over or either side of the Outer Banks, and it's starting to move at a maybe slightly faster forward speed. So it may get then it start accelerating to the northeast on Friday once it moves out over the coastal waters. And of course, in all of this, you've got the high clouds have made it up well up into upstate New York. You see the cloud shield goes pretty far up to the north and northeast into southern New Hampshire and through Maine. Oops, like I said, I'm just learning this, but the high clouds. Okay, come on, erase. Thank you. All right, there you go. That I know will keep it erased. All right, but the high clouds overhead certainly cut down on the amount of sunshine I had today, but there's not a whole lot of heavier cloud cover down through New Jersey. Is a little bit when you get down into Delaware, but the main action still remains in the Carolinas at this point. And here's the enhanced satellite loop tonight, which is supposed to be looping. But there's your eye. You see how the eye wall is kind of wrapped all the way around earlier today? And gradually, as we go through the day, you're going to see this deteriorate in time. And the east side starts to open up a little bit, then attempts to close off again, only to start to open up a bit toward the last few frames if it ever gets there. Also, the cloud tops have warmed significantly. You can see, and you can see that northeast motion now, it's just clearly going northeast, and it almost looks as if if it's on that motion, it may wind up passing south of the Outer Banks. Just gonna have to wait a while to see if that's a temporary thing. Is it being impacted by the coastline and bouncing off the coast a little bit, or is it uh, something more important? I also got to be careful here because I'm looking at the floater. So the floater gives you the illusion, perhaps, that it's a jump to the east rather than a continued northeast motion. But I think I'm seeing kind of a nudge to the east there in the last frame or two before the background, the geography moves. It's been a really long day. All right, so here's the water vapor imagery, and these types of satellites are really useful in a situation like this because you can actually see, and I pulled up the mid-level water vapor imagery, so we can actually see the trough that is going to be driving this eventually to the northeast and out, and it's right up in here. You know, if you watch the motion, you can pick out the drier air is actually moving in this direction. So this is the shortwave trough that is coming down, and that is going to take Dorian, and Dorian's going to do something like this, maybe a bit more of a straight line than I drew, but that's the general direction that we're going to wind up taking this to the northeast, offshore, south of New Jersey, south of Long Island, and southern New England, and then maybe a little bit of impact in southeastern New England with some rain and some gale force winds, at least for a while. So here's the Hurricane Center's latest forecast as of 5 p.m. And that is on the advisory at 33.1 north, 78.5 west. Maximum sustained winds 105 miles an hour, so we're still at a Category 2 status, and moving northeast to 10. And the blue are tropical storm warnings, so we have those up for southeastern Virginia, Chesapeake Bay, and up to about Fenwick Island in Delaware. Hurricane warnings from the Carolina Virginia border, south and southwest, still extends down to south of Charleston, although I imagine we're going to start to see those warnings get discontinued in short order. And just to get the 7 o'clock update, is at 33.3, 78.1, northeast at 10, 964 millibars, 28.47. So the pressure has come up. The movement is 035. So I was thinking either 030 or 040. They split the difference. 035 at 10 miles an hour. 65 miles southwest of Wilmington as of 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and 55 miles southeast of Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. So it appears as if we are seeing it clear Myrtle Beach, 41 to 52 on the latest observation there. And I want to go back to this to just see if I got to figure out how to get rid of this. So let's see if that does it. Nope. It's like once you turn it on, you can't turn it off. Okay, no matter. You know what? I'm trying here, so I'll get this all mastered by tomorrow, so that it'll be working the way it's supposed to be. Here's the latest recon, and we got the plane. It's coming in now. You can see it up here on the. Actually, I'm sorry, it's going out. It just flew back in over the center. We've got some winds between 83 and 96, but I don't see any 96 to 113, so we'll just wait to see what kind of pressure plot they get. But certainly the pressure's starting to edge up. It's behaving the way it should be behaving at this stage of this the life cycle of this storm. Now here's the radar, the close-up radar view from Charleston, South Carolina, where we're seeing the back edge of the rain now beginning to pull away. And you see how far inland it goes, almost to just east of Columbia, seeing some radar echoes moving moving from what appears to be north to south, rotating around the circulation of the storm, which is, you see Georgetown there on the edge, so it's east of there. And here's the Wilmington radar, the heavy rains that are on the west side of the eye wall, extending back to the South Carolina coast, back to about Myrtle Beach. Bit of a hole there in Wilmington at the moment, but you see how the rain shield now is just beginning to shift more to the northwest. This is what happens when they start to gain latitude, and eventually you're going to see this morph over into a post-tropical system. It's still clearly tropical because you do have a warm core, you do have an eye, a tight band of strong winds right near the center. There's no question that this is still tropical, but you are starting to see the impacts of it getting further north into the higher latitudes. Now, this radar is pretty interesting because of the fact that this is where we've been seeing a lot of these tornado warnings and severe thunderstorm warnings that have occurred all on the north side, the north of the center and northeast of the center. You're getting these really strong bands that are rotating around, and there's one strong band here in particular that is a standout, and that is this one here, right in there. That band right there is very, very strong. You've got some powerful cells in here. So as a result, you're getting these boxes are all either severe thunderstorm or tornado warnings, and we do actually have a working tornado warning east of Goldsboro. Robert Brown, just to let you know, there's a little tornado warning that just went up as of 7:10, and we've got all these other severe thunderstorm warnings going on all around it. So I really have to kind of do a little digging here on how this particular mechanism works with regards to tornadoes being produced. I wonder in this particular case that we're dealing with a storm that has such a history with a very, very well developed core going back to the time that it was heading for the Virgin Islands. Hurricanes a lot of the time will maintain that characteristic for a good chunk of its life cycle, even when it has moved further north and has changed somewhat from its previous intensity. Of course, obviously, from where it was at a Category 5 now at a Category 2. But there's still a lot of that really rich tropical air that's involved in all of this, and that might be that might play a role I think someone that's much more versed. This is a Levi Cowan question, I believe, on for tropical tidbits. So no change in the forecast logic. Remember we talked a little earlier about where the trough was on the water vapor imagery coming down in out of the northern plains. Well, now we can take a look at it uh, on the models, and you can see where the trough is here, right there. And there's another short wave right behind it. And here's Dorian right in this spot. And we're going to take this and then head it on out up to the northeast over toward Nova Scotia. Uh, I just want to go back really fast to that uh, for the forecast map of the hurricane centers for their track, and you'll notice that the area that I am responsible that I cover basically from southern New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, southeastern New York into Connecticut and Long Island. That area, it basically skips over it. So that's the one stretch where we're not seeing any kind of warnings. There are tropical storm warnings up for the coastal waters, out 20 miles and beyond. So that makes complete sense. The ocean is going to get roughed up here in a big way during the day tomorrow, and then particularly tomorrow night into Saturday as that storm goes by and heads towards Nova Scotia. So it's no surprise that the tropical storm warnings are up for the coastal waters. But given this upper air pattern that we have, you're not going to see, I really don't think we're going to see very much actual weather from the standpoint of prolonged rain and wind for the coastal areas. Maybe you get a little bit of rain that sneaks into coastal and southern New Jersey for tomorrow, later tomorrow into tomorrow evening. But other than that, and also possibly for eastern Long Island. But other than that, I just don't see it. And you see how those northern troughs just pick up Dorian and just punt it out to the northeast. Now, an upper low starts to form here in southeastern Canada. That energizes the upper feature that represents Dorian as it approaches Nova Scotia. It gets really wrapped up and tight there. So that's why I think that this could be a bit of a powerhouse as it approaches Nova Scotia and Newfoundland for Saturday afternoon and evening for Nova Scotia. And then it kind of goes just west of Newfoundland as it lifts up toward Labrador and then gets kicked away to pass just south of Greenland. By the way, you can also see the impact here of Gabrielle is out in the central Atlantic, and that's this feature right there. Gabrielle is getting a little bit of influence from the deepening trough that's off of southeastern Canada, and as a result, it gets drawn northwest, northward, and then eventually it gets picked up by the westerlies Sunday night, Monday, and then that one gets moved away to the northeast and gets absorbed by that upper feature that's sitting over Greenland. So things seem to be playing out according to plan. And by the way, when we look at this longer term, there are a couple of things I think we should pay a little bit of attention to. We do have this wave coming off the African coast. Now, that wave, I think, is going to get pushed along to the west. One of the things that's happening here as we go into early next week is that we have this upper low that forms west of the Canary Islands and north of the Cabo Verde Islands, right in here. The wave at this point is probably far enough west where it's bypassed the influence of that upper low. Although it may be producing some stronger winds aloft, which might be the reason why the models may have backed off on some initial development of this, and perhaps that's why the Hurricane Center backed off on the tropical storm formation percentage in the short term. But what's going to happen is that once it gets out there, you're going to have an upper high that's going to start building here in the Atlantic from in the East Coast and kind of extending out westward. The westerlies in the upper atmosphere pull way up out in the Atlantic, and they actually pull up to about New Jersey, New York City here later next week. So if that's the case, You got an upper high here. You got an upper high that's here in Texas and built across the Gulf states to off the East Coast. And generally, you have high pressure, although not particularly strong, but higher pressures across the Atlantic. So this, to me, would suggest that anything that's out here is going to at least want to try to go to the west or west northwest if the high isn't really all that strong. So something we should keep an eye on with these future waves that are moving off the African coast. And then in the longer term, while you do have some troughing there that drops down into the Atlantic along about 55, 60 degrees west, eventually that trough is going to pull out. So all these things are, we're kind of speculating openly about what it might be in the tropics down the road in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. I suspect we're going to have another named storm, or possibly maybe two, depending on how these waves behave when they move on out. Okay, so let me refresh this. Maybe that gets rid of it. Okay, good. So let's put the precip map up here and get a little. We'll do the wide shot first. The late afternoon GFS, I don't think it's really showing very much. You see this wave here on September 11th, September 12th. There's a little 10-12 closed low. But bear in mind that the models were not showing very much with Dorian. If you remember, the GFS was wiping it out. The European actually has something, does do something with this. So I would be very cautious. Just look at the overall pattern that right now we're in a very active period. So we could see systems develop going down the road later next week. You do have something that low, it starts to energize a little bit when it gets east of the Leeward Islands. There's still some sort of identifiable feature there heading into the Caribbean. And you do have waves that are coming across. It's less important to me that the models do anything with these things. Oftentimes I'd rather, if you're going to look for tropical systems to develop, you almost want them not to show anything. And here's the Europeans' view with respect to Dorian at the 5,000 foot level. And suddenly on this run, it kind of loses what was out there. On the run prior to this, it tried to take something north of the Leeward Islands, and it looked like it was going to be deflected back to the west. As I said, I think there's enough out there and enough. There are enough weather systems out there, and that the overall pattern here on the Atlantic side still remains favorable for tropical storm development in the longer term. Okay, so back home we go. Let's bring up the GFS as far as the regular weather is concerned, and starting with Dorian, of course, as you see the rains and heavy rains into the eastern part of North Carolina, southeastern Virginia gets into it. You see the rain tomorrow afternoon touching the New Jersey shore and the south shore of Long Island. I don't know how much of that is actually reaching the ground because there's a lot of dry air that's overhead. So you wonder whether the northern fringe of that, a lot of that's just going to evaporate. And then by tomorrow evening, there really isn't much happening from New Jersey to Long Island, Connecticut, and certainly points north are not going to get anything out of this. About 2 a.m., you've got this wrapped up low that's offshore. You're getting into maybe some steadier precip in the Cape, and that moves on to the northeast. And here we go for Nova Scotia and over to Newfoundland. There's a 957 low on the GFS, and I believe it was well down into the 940s on the European, passing just south of the southern shores of Nova Scotia. And in a situation like this, you're going to see, of course, the wind field by now has become something that resembles more of a non-tropical system, but you do have some very strong winds coming onto the coast. The 50 knots sustained coming just inland of the coast in Nova Scotia, and also up further north and west. The southeastern Canada view is right here, and for our friends up in Canada that are watching tonight, so this is at 8 o'clock Saturday evening, and the strong winds at this point starting to spread toward the southwest shores of Newfoundland, 50-knot winds coming in there on the southwest coast. and the low goes in between there and then the mainland side, and then on up northeastward from there as it gets kicked away. It's a fairly wrapped up system, no question, and you're going to get into some pretty decent wind here, I would believe. And here's the surface view showing the rain area that moves up. This is going to be significant rainfall as well, and even a little snow starts to pop up in Labrador. That really dark blue snow showing up on the GFS. I'm going to put the actual radar rather than the precip, and there it is on the radar reflectivity, showing that you get that really intense precip coming down in marginally cold air, and you'll see some heavy wet snow there in the mix. Getting to that time of year, folks. It's early September. A month from now, you might see much more of it in parts of Labrador, as the winter season will start showing hints of developing in the longer term. So back home, as far as the weather in much of the Northeast down into the Mid-Atlantic states, you're going to love this. Oftentimes when you have a major system, a major tropical system that moves in this fashion, you wind up with a rather long stretch of dry weather and rain-free weather, and I think that is going to be the case. The only thing is, on Saturday, there's the first of 2 weak weather fronts or troughs that are going to be coming through here, and they might trigger off a couple of spot showers, especially in inland areas. And there'll be a second one on Sunday, but it doesn't look like there's too much with this. But the bottom line is, it's dry through much of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states Sunday and Monday. And then that high is still sitting up in southeastern Canada going into Tuesday, and you begin the transition over. You're going to start to see the ridge building a little bit in the east. You're going to try to bring some sort of weather front through here later Wednesday into Thursday, and then another high builds down from the north. So it's really kind of a parade of weather fronts that are coming through every 4 days or so, not counting what happens this weekend. Those are just reinforcements from the lower pressures up to the north. But the fronts that are coming in, you've got one on Wednesday. Doesn't look like there's much with it. And then you have another one that's coming in for later next weekend that might have some showers with that after it goes by. When you look at the overall upper air, folks, going through the entire forecast period, it really is pretty much the same flavor as far as the pattern is concerned. The northern part of the jet ebbing and flowing, coming and going, pulling up a bit to the north, dropping down to the south, shortwave troughs that are moving along. And you can see it here just on the North America view. As I'll run it back to where Dorian is. Trough lifts out, ridge pops up a little, shortwave goes by in Canada, keeps the ridge a bit suppressed, ridge tries to pop up again, another shortwave flattens it out, and then yet another one drops in, and then here comes yet another one, and this one toward the end of the forecast period, if you want to believe in the fantasy of day 16, is a rather impressive looking a trough that is dropping into the eastern part of the United States. It's been it's been so persistent. I would have thought by now we would have had some kind of a realignment at least of what the upper air pattern's been, but it just has been it's just been pretty solid. The overall setup here in the Pacific and out over on the Atlantic side, we've had this tendency for higher than normal pressures building up toward Greenland. Much of the summer, we've been sitting with a negative NAO for a good part of the summer months, along with a negative EPO. Well, no, that I didn't check the teleconnections. We could do that. Let's take a look at this. I was just looking at some low temperatures, by the way, starting with tonight, and it's nice and cool, mid 50s to low 60s, and then tomorrow night into Friday morning, you've got 40s and 50s. This system pulling down some of that cooler air, and it stays cool going into the weekend. Now we can lose this. Let me see if I can bring the teleconnections up. I haven't looked at these in a while. So you see how PNA is kind of flattish. The EPO is negative, and then it goes into the neutral zone, slightly positive in the longer term. The NAO is actually strongly positive going into next week, late next week, before it collapses down to the zero line and then goes negative late in the period. So that could be the reason why you're seeing the model show that trough as deep as it is out at day 16. But as I said, that's not the sort of thing that we're going to have a whole lot of confidence about with regards to the longer term. So I think that pretty well sums it up tonight. It's it's been a long week for me. And I don't know, for those of you who weren't here last night, I did an hour and 43-minute live stream, which I haven't done in a long, long time. Ellen Abraham from Alaska, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really do appreciate it greatly. Linda Hernandez, that's correct. Tropical storm warnings for counties east of Richmond down to the Virginia, North Carolina border. And you're going to get some rain for sure, and you'll probably see some wind out of it. And also for the folks in Cape Cod and Nantucket, Hyannis, in that area in southeastern Massachusetts, we'll probably see rain and some gales. Fringe gales for Long Island just offshore and off the New Jersey coast. It might get a little gusty at the beaches, but I'm not expecting anything of consequence. Steve Vitale, watching from the UK. Welcome. Always love seeing folks from the UK and watching from Ireland as well. I know you folks are having to deal with Brexit and have been dealing with it for quite a while. Hopefully they'll figure that out one of these days. Ben McGinnis up in the Maritimes. Yeah, it does look kind of nasty here. So it'll be interesting to see if we wind up getting it to be as strong as the European, because as impressive as the GFS is in terms of the depth, the European's actually even deeper, taking it down into the low 940s. And yesterday it even took it down, the pressure down into the 930s. Environment Canada being very slow to put warnings up. I'm going to defer to them because they know your area better than I do. I mean, I'm seeing from what the models are seeing, but also there's probably there's a bit of time here as you're talking. It is Thursday, and you're talking about something that's going to be developing during the day Saturday. I'm sure it's being talked about, so it's not going to be a total surprise. Anthony Orr pointing out tonight that Dorian is one of only 2 Category 5 hurricanes to make landfall on the Abaco Islands, the other having occurred in 1932, and is the only such storm on record to have impacted Grand Bahama. So very interesting. These are not the kinds of events that you see. When you see these big events, it's sort of along the lines of when you get, if you go through a red light, or you get pulled over for a traffic ticket, or heaven forbid, if you get into a fender bender, and it hasn't happened to you in many years, for a period of time, you really feel kind of vulnerable, and you think it's going to happen again almost immediately. And then time passes, and that feeling does disappear. The same thing applies when you have situations like this. These are generational events. They are not events that occur every day. They are generational events, and they happen. And then when they happen, you don't see them again for a while for that particular area. That's why, when you look at the records, you're going back to 1932 for the last time the Abaco Islands got hit as badly as this. So you're talking a multi-generational event, or something like Sandy is a generational event for this area of the Northeast. Camille for the Gulf Coast, Andrew for the Florida coast. That doesn't mean that there aren't other hurricanes in between that don't have any impact. Of course, there will be, but in terms of these really standout destructive events, they are thankfully events that come every 20, 30, 40 years. And hopefully it's not like what happened a couple of years ago when we had Irma and Jose and Maria, 3 Category 5 storms almost back to back to back, and Irma and Maria impacting pretty much the same places and giving those people double hits. One buzz saw per hurricane season, in my opinion, is enough thank you very much. It's very hard. Even, I mean, on my end, I'm looking at these things and I'm giving my opinions on them with regards to forecasting and what I think they're going to do. Always reminding everybody that their first go-to place as far as decisions are concerned are local officials, local National Weather Service office at weather.gov, and the National Hurricane Center. Uh, so I'm kind of watching this, and you see it, and it's oftentimes it's very very hard. Um, it's very hard to fathom when you're looking at this. And I took a little exception to someone who said that with regards to Dorian, that no one predicted it to be a Category 5. Well, look, I love people who armchair quarterback. If you understand how weather works and how you should follow it, you would never make a statement like that. Certainly, the storm was indicated to, once it became clear that this thing was reacting in ways that was a little bit of a shocker. I think it was a bigger shock, probably, that it did what it did over the Virgin Islands, intensifying very rapidly into a hurricane while it was sitting over the Virgin Islands, which created havoc and 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts. That part of it might have been a slight surprise, but it became clear at that point that this was going to wind up developing into a major hurricane. But when it comes to forecasting intensity and getting to these extremes that we see, you can't. You can't do it. It's very difficult. Plus, from my standpoint, just to give an example, when we would go back, if you go back in the live streams, I think I did say at some point that it wouldn't shock me if this thing became a Category 5. Um, I don't think that that was really a grand statement to make as far or a forecast skill um, that got me to that point. It did certainly look like conditions were favorable for strengthening, and it did certainly look like the outflow was going to be favorable for this to become a major hurricane and maybe push the envelope over all the way up. The Hurricane Center did indicate in their forecast that it was going to become a strong Category 4, but to actually come out and say that is that's just something that you're going against the grain because it just doesn't happen too often. And I would also point out, if you remember back to Hurricane Florence last year, everything as it was approaching the North Carolina coast, everything suggested that it should have re-strengthened back. It should have re-strengthened to a Category 3 at the very least. The upper air was excellent. The outflow was all there. The storm was getting ready to move over the very warm waters of the Gulf Stream, and it never happened. But in spite of the fact that all those conditions seemed to point to intensification, something was amiss, and the storm did not really get going again. And then it came into the coast as a Category 1. And of course, everyone was so focused on that number that they forgot about the fact that the bigger story that was going to be with Florence was the incredible rains that it was going to produce in North Carolina. Somehow that part of it got lost, and you had criticisms of forecasters because the storm wasn't the tragedy that they were hoping for. On the other hand, it does finally moves inland, slows down to an absolute crawl, and dumps 2 to 3 feet of rain and floods much of eastern North Carolina and parts of South Carolina. It's just astounding to me. I have a really tough time. As I see these storms produce the kind of damage that they have produced, I have a really tough time now with some people who complain that or seem to think that they're smarter and that they're the experts. So they complain that it wasn't what it was predicted to be, et cetera, with almost a certain sense of anger to it. Those same people that complain about this would be the same people that complain that when something does happen, that they weren't warned. I would just suggest this. I think anyone, and I've said this to a few people, do without. Turn the TV off. Don't go to weather websites. Pay no attention to it, or go figure it out yourself. Knock yourself out. All the tools are there on the internet. You can figure it out yourself. I guarantee you that you're asking for big trouble if that's the case. But how can I stop you since you seem to know better than the experts who uh, are just doing the best job that they can, and their responsibilities and what they say and do are impacting people's lives in a serious way and could save lives for that matter. So um, I think I'm going to end my rant there. I've said enough. I've gotten myself out on one of these tangents, and this is when you can tell that we're at a point now where I'm kind of growing weary with the Dorian, and I just want it to go away. I think everybody wants it to go away. The mainstream news and cable news all talk about doom and gloom from this hurricane and global warming. Well, you knew that the political part of the conversation was going to get in here somehow. I really have learned to tune all that out. I'm just not interested. Uh, it's very predictable to have the same usual suspects on in politics on both sides of the aisle just kind of come out and use this as an opportunity to be political when you're dealing with um, uh, devastation in people's lives and so on. Get that problem solved. To take care of that first, and then if you want to have conversations about it, just wait a little bit. Because when someone's lost their home and you're sitting around spending your time arguing about um, uh, whose fault it is in climate change, well, that person has lost their home or worse, and wants some attention and needs some attention in order to regroup and start their lives again. So let's try and kind of focus on that. I don't want to hear it anymore with all of this. It's too predictable. It's too easy. I just want to forecast. And by the way, that also goes for the geoengineering folks that I know love to wait for these things to happen, and then they post on my comments about asking me and getting upset because I'm not addressing the fact that they're spraying chemtrails just so that the storm will approach and go in a certain way. Take your conversation and your chemtrails and your geoengineering and all those things that you find interesting and important to you to a YouTube channel that covers it, because I'm not going to discuss it here. It's not relevant to me. This is a weather page. We do meteorology, we do weather forecasting, and all those things that go with it. And I'm not going to talk about it. And I said that in a very nice way to somebody in a comment from last night, and they got upset. You kid, he said, "Oh, what are you kidding me?" And I said, "Oh, look, I'm just not interested. It doesn't belong here, and we're going to keep it off of here." Mark G, thank you very much for hitting super chat, and you hope I get a break soon. Well, I will tell you this: after we're done with Saturday and Saturday night, unless there's anything pressing on Sunday, I think I'm going to just kind of take a little breather on Sunday. Uh, if the tropics are staying busy, then I'll probably be on. But I am going to take a breather here at the Heart People, Shelly Man Studios. I know, another group. I understand, and just the fact that I'm even mentioning it is probably a foolish thing for me to do, because then they're going to start chiming in on the comments. But I'm just going to save you the trouble if you're hearing this. I'm not. I'm not going to knock what you're saying. It just from that standpoint, because I don't want to get into a debate about it. You obviously have decided that these things are real and that they're important to you, and I understand that. They're not important to me. They're not relevant to my page, and I really don't want to discuss it here. So I can save you the trouble um, about commenting on it and trying to convince me that I should be part of that conversation, because I'm not going to be. Lori Skerachek, I hope I pronounced it right. Too much damage here. Evacuation lifting tonight. Where are you? I'd be curious about where you are. Uh, and of course, we've got Gerard Stapleton from the island of St. Martin, and you know all too well the devastation from Irma and from Maria from 2 years ago. and I hope your beautiful island has rebuilt to some degree from that damage. Lord Kate, did you just check that chemtrail discussion? Yes, great. I mean, I wasn't nasty with the person. I don't get nasty with them anymore. It doesn't. I don't gain anything by doing that. I just, like I said, I just simply say, you know what? It's just not for me. I don't want to talk about it. Mirtha Gunter in North Carolina. I hope you're getting the rain if you want the rain, unless you're too far west. I have a feeling you were probably a little too far west to get the rain that actually extends north and west of Raleigh Durham, but doesn't go all the way into western North Carolina. William Huber, who knows what it was like 400 years ago before records were kept on hurricanes? Well, we don't know. Certain things we do know from records that are there, but no, we don't know. And is this upcycle that we're in part of an upcycle that is there actually is an upcycle that research has found, and it began in about 1995, and we've been in that upcycle. It coincides, by the way, and I don't know if there's any correlation with that, but to some degree, it does coincide with the snow upcycle that's been through much of the coastal Northeast, but that started in 2000, so there was about a 5-year lag. Now, whether there's some very broad connection, I have no idea. And I think it's a bit of a stretch. One of the things you got to be careful of when you you try to find these sort of common points to say, hey, it was like this, and we had a hurricane season that produced this many storms, and in a couple of years that we had activity like this. We wound up with snowy winters in the Northeast or snowy winters in the Mid-Atlantic. Sometimes, in fact, much of the time, it's just really a series of perfect coincidences that those things happen, and you put value to them. And oftentimes, what I have found is that when you think you found a trend that has very, very loose connections to, you might tend to make those connections stronger in your own mind than they actually are. The trend works until everybody's figured it out, and then it somehow stops working. Um, it's funny how that happens, but it does happen. Uh, you can apply it to a number of different things, different areas. You can apply it to the stock market when it comes to technical analysis. People look at chart patterns and they see a pattern that's worked 4 or 5 times before, so you start to trade on it, but then everybody else starts to figure it out, and as soon as you get enough people that figure out this pattern, guess what? It stops working. And suddenly what you thought would make you a profit turns out to be a big loser for a lot of people. So you got to be really careful when you see when you see something that looks like it's going to give you the magic bullet, because it isn't. Michael Azera, no, there should not be a category 6, because a category 5 is catastrophic. I don't know what's beyond catastrophic. Um, I, Outside of just total apocalyptic, the world has come to an end and disintegrated. Catastrophic is about as far as the worst it could be. So I don't know why you need to have a category 6 or or just keep adding categories. 5 defines the catastrophic slash, let's call it locally apocalyptic um, outcome. I don't see the reason. You could have it. Look, you could have set this up with 3 categories. Okay, some light damage, moderate damage, severe damage, and maybe make it 4th one and make that catastrophic. They Saffir-Simpson scale broke it down to 5, and they used statistics to with regards to damage and other factors. So they figured out that, well, a category 1 will produce this type of damage, and a category 2 this type, and 3 and 4. But again, 5 is catastrophic, so I just don't really see why we need to add another number. Plus, look, it also, and let's be honest here, right, the category 5A, 5B, 5C. But let's be honest here. These are numbers that work really well for the media. So a category 6 is only going to give them more ammunition, the news media, more ammunition to take everything to even more to an apocalyptic conclusion. So you've got the scale that they're working with. It's a 5, and 5 is the top. There's no reason to go above it. The only thing I would say is that, and this would be a very hard thing to do because it's a communication issue. I believe it's a communication issue more than it is a scale issue. When you have a situation like um, Florence, where all the emphasis in the media was on the wind, when the emphasis really should have been on the rain. That's not the fault of the Hurricane Center, because the Hurricane Center, along with other forecasters, along with myself, if you go back and look at some of the Florence live streams, emphasized that rain was going to wind up being huge out of this. Okay. Especially when we were seeing it weaken down to a 1. It did not change the rain part of this of the storm. The equation for that remained the same, and it got lost somehow. The message got lost, and it got lost because, as I recall, many of the news channels began kind of piling on the notion of it not coming in as a predicted 4, but as a category 1. They made it to where they were upset over the fact that it wasn't coming in as the destructive category 4 hurricane that was predicted in some of the earlier forecasts. So they completely forgot about the rain part of it. That's where I think that needs to be solved, and I don't know how you do it, because the problem is I could sit here until I'm blue in the face as someone who offers his opinions, and I'm not alone. There are so many others and so many reputable forecasters that offer their opinions about things, but somehow they don't get heard loud enough. The message is predetermined in many instances by young producers in newsrooms who have very little life experience and don't understand, or just don't listen. I can't tell you how big that problem is. And I think if I had this conversation with other people from other newsrooms, they would tell you the same thing. The weather people will tell you the same thing. They will go in, and 40 years of doing this, going into newsrooms, explaining exactly and clearly what I think is going to happen and what to expect, and taking it as my responsibility to look at scripts being written to make sure that the right information is going out. But I can't control it all, and it gets away from you. And you've got other people and other reporters, and they've already kind of formulated in their minds, and they don't always come to me and say, "Hey, I'm going to say this." And I have worked with a number of reporters who have come with me, and I applaud them over the years, that would come to me beforehand and say, "Hey, Joe, I'm going to be saying this. Does this make sense? Is this the right way to say it?" And if I find that there's something wrong, I'd say, "Hey, look, you need to change this. You're saying that you're saying A, and it should maybe be B. You might want to say it this way." But not all of them do that. There's a timing issue. Have to be getting. They want to get it on the air and get it on air as fast as possible, and stuff falls through the cracks. That's the reality of how TV news works. And one of the things that, at the very least, is going to be happening to me is the fact that I am in 2.5 months. I will be gone from my TV job at Fios One News. I will, which for those of you who are not in this area, is a hyper-local cable news operation for Long Island, New Jersey, and for the Lower Hudson Valley, for the areas that surround New York City. And for those of you who live in this area, there's News 12, which is also the other, or the original, of which I was one of the original News 12 people back in 1986. So I will be done with that. And while I will occasionally be freelancing at WPIX TV, because I don't get to do it very often, and when I do it, it's a lot of fun. And to be honest, the pay is good, so I do it. But that'll be a once in a while type of thing. This is going to allow me the opportunity to take what I see is where the future really lies in what I have been doing here on YouTube and on Facebook and on my 3 websites and on my free weather app. Actually, now 2 free weather apps that are out there, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So I will be spending all my time really uh, doing that. And I'm going to be in a position now for the first time in my career to be able to, which I am now doing what I'm doing. I'm just going to be doing it 24/7. But this is a platform where I can sit here and pontificate the way I am, like as if it was a podcast about issues that are important to me weather-wise. I don't have a time restriction. I don't have a boss that is going to be telling me that you can't talk about this. We need you to talk about that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's my channel. I'll be able to do whatever I want. Websites, write what I want. And of course, it's what you want. It's what you who come here every night on these live streams on a regular basis, and you basically tell me what you want. Okay, what you want to see. I put it up on the screen. We talk about it. You ask questions in the chat. You bring up very interesting and important points. I pull the maps up and we spend time discussing it. That's what I like to do. And every once in a while, I'd like to be able to do a 1 hour and 43-minute live stream like I did last night, but I am not going to do that tonight. In fact, we are up to 55 minutes here, and uh, that is long enough, and I am getting tired. Lord Kate, I've been watching here since Winter Storm Jonas back in 2016. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It's nice to see that I have over 8,500 subscribers. Can't wait to get to the 10,000 mark, and hopefully I'll be able to get there between now and the winter time. I'm just loving this. This is great. I'm loving doing this every night. And enjoying you as the audience coming here and getting involved in the chat. And it's just great. It's something I wish, in a way, I honestly wish, this sort of thing is really made for somebody like me. This is the kind of thing I enjoy. There are a lot of people that are in my industry, in the TV industry, that hate this stuff. They want to go back to the old days, and that's just never going to happen. I just sort of wish that maybe I was born 20 years later, so that I could really partake in what's going to be happening over the next 20, 30 years. By that time, I'm going to be, God willing, I'll be close to 90 if I'm still around. I don't know if I'm going to have the strength to be still doing this much past 70, but let's take it one year at a time. And I'm certainly enjoying myself. And again, and it's all thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen who join here on a nightly basis, and I really do appreciate it. So we went from a rant to a self-analysis to a congratulations to my audience for thinking that I'm okay, and I appreciate it greatly. Okay, speaking of which, it is 7:57. It's been a great hour and a fun hour. So thank you very much for being here. But I'm starting to lose my voice. So we'll call it a night. Mark G. and Ellen Abraham, thank you very much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really, really appreciate it. And yes, thank you. That's a cigar for me on the drive home. All right, so tomorrow is Friday. It's the end of the week. Weather in 5 in the morning, so you get a quick update of what's happening. And you folks watching from Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, they will be paying attention to you, so be sure to tune in. And then tomorrow night, we'll do our regular YouTube live stream. We'll shoot for 7 o'clock Eastern Time. In between, there are website posts that you can look at, and you can find that at meteorologistjoechaffee.com. Or you can go to my buddy Ben Scott, who does New York City weather on nycweathernow.com. I will also tell you, you can download my free weather app on Google Play or on the App Store. Just search meteorologist Joe Chaffee or just plain old Joe Chaffee. If you have an Android device, the app will take you to your own local, to your own location. You don't have to put it in every time. Still waiting for Apple to do that, run the update through so that it will be just like that for the iPhones. But try and be a little more patient, and hopefully in the next week or two, it'll be there. My other app that we've come out with is available on the Android side, but not yet available on the App Store. So if you have an Android, you can, and you like my buddy Angry Ben, if you follow him on Angry Ben's Angry Weather on Facebook, my pal Ben Scott, who works my nycweathernow.com website, his app is called the Angry Weatherman. Now it's similar to mine, but he's got his forecast on there, as well as you can get the Weather Service forecast. Goes to your location on its own. Zoom radar is on both of them. But I know some of you like to read my perspective, and I know a lot of people forecast shop, and that's okay because if you go to Angry Ben, you're kind of shopping in the same store, just a different aisle, and I understand that. Um, but that app is free as well. So that's the Angry Weatherman, and it's on Android. And go ahead and download it. Have them both on your phone so that you could have Joe Stradamus on one side and Angry Ben on the other, giving you all your weather information. Alex, Adam, I'll chat tomorrow. Got this concerning observation in the Atlantic. Absolutely, have at it. I'll be here tomorrow, as I said, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And if Joe Rayo's up to it, we'll bring him on and we'll do another Joe and Joe weather show, which we've done a couple of times in the last week or so. Have a great night, everybody, and be safe. We will see you tomorrow right here on my YouTube channel.